evening, everyone. Welcome to Neighborhood Watch. What a year. First time in 6 months we've had an in-person meeting, and we all have to wear these masks and stay X many feet apart and all of this stuff. It's been a very interesting year for all of us. Everyone has worked really well. I'd like to go through and thank the community for all of the support that they've given to law enforcement, that they've put into making sure that everyone stays safe in this very unusual year. So, welcome to Neighborhood Watch. I can't really tell if all of you have been here before. If you're new here, welcome. The rest of you, welcome back. This month, we get to introduce a new chief of police. This is Chief George Dingfelder. He just started about a month.
This is my 8th week.
This is his 8th week, so 2 months ago.
June 1st.
So I'm going to go through and turn everything over to him for just a moment, let him introduce himself and say hi to everybody, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, thank you. First off, if you were involved in selecting me, I greatly appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here in Monte Vista. A little bit of my background, I actually started here 25 years ago. June of 95, I started as a trooper here. So and then I went all over the state as I promoted through the ranks with State Patrol. And the timing was perfect for me to put in when Chief Rosecrans left, and I was able to, lucky enough, was selected to this position. So I'm very excited to be here. I grew up in a rural community out in the middle of nowhere in Montana. So this was pretty much like being home. I love these small rural communities, the values that come with these small rural communities. And this was just a good fit. So I was lucky enough when I threw my hat in the ring and got selected for it. So I'm excited to be here, getting to know a lot of people reacquainting with them. I've known a lot of people because, again, I started my career here and have been lucky enough to spend most of my law enforcement career in the San Luis Valley, other than a few years away on the West Slope in Vail and places like that. So, again, very excited to be here. Neighborhood Watch, we're definitely going to keep that going. This is such a good program to get the community's involvement in making this a better place to live and to work and to reducing crime and stuff. And really, we're a small department, and we can't do this without the citizens. There's just absolutely no way that we can do this without the citizens. We need the citizens' input, their advice, and you'll find them very community-oriented about and taking advice from the community on what they want. One of the questions that was asked to me is, well, what do you hope to accomplish in Monte Vista? It's not what I want to accomplish, it's what the citizens want me to accomplish, because that's who we work for, is we work for you. So we're here to work for you and what you want to see accomplished. I have some ideas, again, having some really good training through the years, spent 10 weeks at the FBI Academy and got to do some really cool training there and learn about community involvement as well as different programs and things like that. So again, Josh kind of runs the Neighborhood Watch, but really the Neighborhood Watch is really what you guys want it to be and what you want. We're kind of more the advisors, I guess, but whatever you guys want. We have some ideas of different things that, but if there's something specific that you want us to talk about, we will talk about it at the next meeting, and Josh is great at producing PowerPoints. I am not an IT guy. I don't know. I can barely turn on a computer. So I'm good at talking. That's about all I'm good at is talking. But when it comes to doing presentations like this with computers and stuff, Josh is really kind of a go-to guy. But again, welcome. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I told him that I would give him at a minimum 5 years. And then we'll see what happens from there. But I'd like to do at least 5 years here and spend a full 5 years here with the department and get things going and stuff like that. So again, I walked into a good situation because it's a good department with good equipment, good training. The city's done a really good job of getting the police department headed in the right direction. So again, I'll stick around, and after Josh's presentation, I'm willing to answer any questions and throw in any input on this. So I'm going to turn it back over to Josh. Unless anybody has any questions right up front. Nothing now. Let him do his presentation. I'll hang around, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right, guys. So this is a little bit of something that isn't talked about a lot in law enforcement, code enforcement. It is very much part of law enforcement. You see the Monte Vista Police Department code enforcement truck driving around the day. I'm sure you've seen it in other cities, but it's, what do they do other than go through and say, clean your weeds? Well, they actually do a lot. They have a page of codes that they need to follow that is almost as thick as the criminal code that I have to go through and enforce. And that's just for the city of Monte Vista. So what is code enforcement? Okay, code enforcement is actually a civil action. It's not a criminal proceeding. So for a criminal proceeding, you can actually go to jail. You can have your freedoms taken away. You can have lengthy sentences. You can have additional fines. Civil law deals with disputes between individuals or organizations, basically between two parties. And in the city of Monte Vista, back when, there were people that developed the code that the city of Monte Vista goes by. And it basically is, from what I understand, basically a large homeowners association. These are the rules that you agree to adhere to live in the city. So code enforcement falls into the civil domain. So anytime code enforcement shows up, they go through and they're engaging in a civil legal process between a citizen on the behalf of the city. That is their role. And why all of that is important and why this very unusual aspect of law enforcement exists is something that I'm going to explain over the next course of the presentation. So, code enforcement deals with animal control. And we have all seen the cats running around town. We've seen the dogs getting into the garbage cans. We have seen the just animals go through and chase a kid or something like that. That is one of the things animal control or code enforcement deals with. Next is nuisance ordinance. And nuisance ordinance is a very lengthy set of rules that I'll go through and break down to you in a very small, basically one sentence. Parking enforcement, nobody likes it when someone parks in the roadway. It causes problems for the drivers, it causes problems for the people on the side of the road, it causes all kinds of problems. And then building code, zoning code, there are, I say other codes. And the reason I say other codes is because there are more codes than I was able to read in a single sitting. There's a website here. I have a copy of the PowerPoint. If you want the copy of the PowerPoint, let me know. There is, the municipal code can be found online at that address. So if you want that, I would gladly provide that for you. So the first one is animal control. The first thing we're going to talk about is animal control. And this is basically law enforcement for the animal kingdom here in Monte Vista. Everything from cats, dogs, there are even codes for chickens and other livestock. So animal control deals with animal conduct. That can be loose animals and how your animal acts when it is loose. So if a dog is aggressive, that's animal conduct. If a dog or if a cat is going through and you let your cat out and it goes through and harasses the neighbor's dog, that's animal conduct. That's all stuff that is addressed by code enforcement. Loose animals, letting your cats loose, letting your dogs loose. How many animals you can have. The method that you keep your animals, okay? Making sure that, basically this is making sure your animals are safe, same way law enforcement tries to help make sure that your kids stay safe. Okay, there's child neglect laws, there's elderly neglect laws. Code enforcement deals with animal neglect, animal safety. There's code for types of animals, like I said, dogs, chickens, pigs, cats. Take your pick of your favorite animal. There's probably a rule for it. Tags and vaccinations. This is making sure your dogs are vaccinated is huge because it's very easy for dogs to get sick and to pass that on with a bite. We have codes for making sure that dogs are vaccinated, dogs are tagged, registered, licensed, and certain animals are licensed. All of that is to make sure that the community stays safe. Right? And that's really the premise of code enforcement, making sure that we are civil with each other and staying safe with each other. So, as I said, conduct of animals, tags, vaccinations, dogs at large. Back to animals loose. Okay, there's been some questions about who cares if a dog runs loose? Who cares if a cat runs loose? Well, the reason that this is an issue, dogs or other animals will get into fights with other animals. They may attack people. And there's the possibility dogs love getting into garbage. Okay? And this creates another problem which will be discussed in another code. Okay, so the dog at large, why is there a civil law about this? It's basically to make sure that everyone stays safe, to keep your animals from harming other people, whether monetarily or physically. And this is where code enforcement kind of ventures into the law enforcement aspect, because you can be charged criminally if your dog bites someone, because then you have a vicious animal. That's the statute right there that addresses aggressive animals. So, as I talked before, animal safety, it's making sure that the animal is treated well, making sure they're fed, making sure they're watered. It gets very, very cold here. If you have a little tiny dog, like a Chihuahua or a Pomeranian or something small, it gets into the negative 20s, 30s, 40s. Can you keep a dog in an unprotected, unheated cage outside in those cold weathers? Little tiny dog like that? That dog will become a biological ice cube. It is a very sad thing to see. Code enforcement makes sure that that dog, who cannot protect itself, gets proper shelter, is handled properly, isn't abused, and so forth. Code enforcement may investigate animal cruelty, which is also, once again, a criminal offense. This is where code enforcement ventures into the law enforcement realm, specifically the criminal enforcement area. This is a basic reference on where you can find the references for animal control and what code enforcement deals with. Animal regulations, it says section 6. That means there are pages and pages to that section. This one has a couple more pages for municipal criminal violations regarding animals. And then there's another article just in state statute. There are several pages of rules, laws, regulations, codes that our code enforcement needs to know and understand in order to be able to do his job. And this is just the animal control part, which, if you look at how broad animal control is, can be a job all by itself. Next up is Nuisance Ordinance. There's probably 6 or 8 pages of size 8 font, single-spaced, on just the rules and ordinances and codes for nuisances. And I will go through and tell you all 6 pages in these 4 words. Keep your yard clean. That's all there is to it. The codes basically establish that there can't be an accumulation of trash, of junk, odious or dangerous or noxious material. Basically anything that stinks, anything that can make you sick, any chemicals that can go through and cause harm to your dogs, your kids, to you, anything that's going to be a hazard, a health problem to anyone or anything. You're not allowed to keep that around. Keeping of disabled cars. People go, well, what if I'm repairing a car? Okay, well, keep it in your garage. There's nothing saying that you can't repair an old car. It's when you have, well, can't afford to fix that junker, park it on the side of the road. Up, can't afford to fix that junker, park it in the driveway. Can't afford to fix that junker, park it in your front yard. And you've just built up a whole bunch of cars that you have no intention to repair. That's where this comes in. Now, what happens with those old cars? Rats' nests, beehives, kids play in it and can cut themselves, say broken windows, fluids can get out, get on the ground, poison the ground. These are all things that code enforcement is really designed to try to avoid with the disabled cars. Okay? And there is a section that really boils down to don't have a drug house. It is a class 1 nuisance to have a drug house. Don't have a drug house. Code enforcement, I'll talk about this a little more, is helpful in going through and dealing with the drug situation. This is where civil law is another aspect of law enforcement that can help with some of the very things that plague our society. Because we've all talked about how drug activity results in burglaries, assaults, crime, just crime. There's a civil aspect of law enforcement too. And whether you're investigating the criminal side of it or the civil side of it, drugs are a big problem across the nation, and it is something that every aspect of law is working to address. Rubbish, weeds. Okay, this is just an example of weeds. What's the problem with some weeds? Well, it's ugly. Okay, these ragweeds here, people are allergic to the pollen. Why should the neighbor have to deal with having an allergic reaction because you can't keep your yard clean? Or maybe it's just ugly and detracts from property value. Everybody likes their property being worth something, right? Cleaning up weeds is very much a part of that. By the way, these are all pictures of instances that we've had here in Monte Vista. Okay, this is another example of a trash heap. Kids aren't supposed to go through and be playing on other people's yards, but kids will be kids. This is a civil liability for the owner of the property, for the owner of this trash heap, because he has it. Kid goes through and plays in there, steps on a nail, gets tetanus. Owner has civil liability against him. So code enforcement really helps to protect you from other civil litigation that could be far worse down the road. This is an example of that. This is an example of another house just completely trashed inside and out. So if you're living next to this, when you have the odors of, I'm going to tell you right now, the odors of the food that they just threw out into the yard, the animal feces, and even the human feces because they didn't have running water, what kind of flies and diseases are going to be brought about by those flies? What kind of contaminants and hazards is all that trash going to go through and cause? Code enforcement is really just enforcing public health and safety. Parking enforcement. These are the top 3 parking violations. Okay, parking violations create hazard to drivers. It's governed by the modern traffic code, and it can be problematic for businesses, public service, and people that are disabled. Here, top 4. Parked facing the wrong direction. You actually have to drive down the wrong side of the road to park facing the wrong direction of the road. And then you have to drive down the wrong side of the road again when you're leaving. Now, when this happens at night, you think it's obnoxious when someone goes through and puts their headlights directly in your face on the other side of the road. What about when they're in the same lane as you? Has anybody had that happen? Okay? So, blinds you for a second. Well, when you're going 35, 40, 50 miles an hour, this is a problem, right? Even 35 miles an hour, if you can't see what's going on where you're going, you go like this and kind of turn the wheel. Can you see that you're about to go into the car or into the side of someone's house or into a tree? That's why we're supposed to be avoiding this. Parking more than 12 inches from the curb. Doesn't sound like a big problem until you're parked too far away from the curb. There's a car coming this way, and you're in a Dodge 3500. And your choices at a split second are head on this car or hit the parked car. Hit one of them. Which one do you hit? Park 12 inches from the curb, and it goes through and gives the appropriate amount of lane between the median and the edge of the parked car for pretty much any vehicle that's on the market. Parking in a handicap spot when not disabled. I'm going to be completely frank. How rude. If you don't have a disability, why are you parking in a spot that is specifically designed to help people with disabilities, wheelchair access, crutches, take your pick, from getting out and going to the store? Or getting out and going to whatever service they need to take care of? And obstructing a fire hydrant. This actually falls into a completely different code. I don't know why, but it does. And the code for that is right there. Basically, don't obstruct a fire hydrant. You never know when a building is going to catch on fire, a car is going to catch on fire, and they're going to need to access that fire hydrant. Be courteous to the fact that emergencies exist. This is stuff that I would think that most people understand. But there's always the oddball that parks in the wrong lane of traffic. Parks more than 12 inches from the curb. I had somebody parked almost 3.5 feet from the curb. They were flat out obstructing the lane of traffic. Obviously, that needs to be addressed. I haven't seen anyone park in a handicap spot that weren't supposed to, but I don't really do parking control. I know that there are several people who have. I have heard of complaints where someone who was, for example, in a walker couldn't even get out of their car to get their walker because someone who wasn't handicapped was parked in a handicap zone. Other enforcement. This goes back to be civilized. Code enforcement boils down to be civilized, be clean. It's basically a maintenance of a community to maintain community relations with each other, public safety, human decency. This is what code enforcement largely is asking of the people. So other enforcement actions that code enforcement deals with is building code, zoning, business code, back to drug houses, and safety of living conditions. So safety of living conditions. Has anyone seen a sign on the side of a building that says "Do not occupy"? Or ever heard of condemned building? I know most people have probably heard of condemned building. Basically, these are buildings that are so dangerous that people should not be allowed inside them. And the code requires that there's running water and working electricity, and the building is not damaged to the point that it is unsafe to occupy. So the roof's not caving in, the wall's not buckling, the building's not starting to fall down, the foundation isn't starting to cave in and cause the entire building to collapse in on itself. This code, 14670, is a full page, if not two, of just mentioning things that make a building unsafe. And when a building is unsafe, these are some examples of some bad living conditions. But when a building is unsafe, a do not occupy order will come in. The building gets condemned. And there are ways of taking care of it, but what this is an order from the city stating the building may not be occupied until it's been made safe again. So this isn't hard for failure to pay a water bill and you get your water shut off. You only need to pay your water bill, your water gets turned back on, everything's cool. This gets more difficult when when a roof is caved in. So I wouldn't think I would have to explain necessarily why this is important, but this is an example of another civil litigation that could be more severe. Say you're renting a place, and the building is unsafe and the roof caves in and kills a tenant. That is going to be a lot worse than code enforcement coming in and saying, don't let that happen, get it fixed. After any of the changes are made, the inspection is complete. Now, I had someone ask me a little while back, and I couldn't figure it out for myself for the longest time. What's the big deal with the water not being on? Well, this house right here that has the human feces in a bucket on the side of the house. because you can't flush the feces to an appropriate sanitation facility. That right there by itself was all I needed to know why you need running water. So, if you're curious what all the rules are on what makes a building unsafe per the code for the city of Monte Vista, you can look at the municipal code for chapter 14, article 6, and you will see the many pages of what's considered an unsafe building. So, the code enforcement process. What happens when you're in violation of the code? Well, you still have to go to court. There's still an investigation. It's very similar to what the law enforcement that you see every day does. They do an investigation just like we do. They fill out the same forms that we do. They process a ticket the same way we do. So when a code violation is observed, a complaint might be made either by the code enforcement officer or the neighbor or someone down the street who was just going for a walk and that person's dog was out. That person's dog isn't being taken care of very well. I walked by that house and it smelled like a sewage plant. These are all things that can be examples of complaints that code enforcement deals with. So, at that point, the code violation's investigated. The code enforcement officer will go talk with the people, try to see if they can find the same code violation that the complaint was based on. Sometimes it's not there. That's part of the investigative process. When it's not there, okay, it's not there, and they move on. If it is there, they'll go through and talk with the citizen about it. When they talk about it, one of the things that he'll do is he'll give direction on what it will take for it to be fixed. And he'll give a time frame on how long it's going to take to get into compliance. It's usually about 10 days. At the end of the time frame, the code enforcement officer will go out and do an inspection. Now, when they go out to do an inspection, they can enter your property. They can go through and check the areas that are out of compliance with code. They don't necessarily need a warrant for it, depending on what code infraction is being addressed. Like going inside of someone's house, you're likely to need a warrant. That is something that is addressed by code enforcement. That's something that's addressed by the courts. You'll have to go through and see what that is. If you have questions about that, you can ask your code enforcement officer. But they can go through and inspect whatever code violation there is to address it. At the end of the period of time, they come back. If it's in compliance, cool, case is closed. If it's not in compliance, there's usually a second issue or a warning issued. At the end of the second period, the same process continues. He comes back, he inspects it. Is it fixed? If not, you get a summons and you get to tell the judge why it's not fixed. So you will basically have to go to court. At court, this is where things are a little bit interesting because it's not criminal, as I said. You can't have your freedoms taken away. But with civil process, generally how it's addressed is monetarily. So when a person's cited, they will have the opportunity to speak with the judge. And the judge will determine further action that's needed. You have X amount of time to come into compliance. If you don't, you will be fined. You may be fined before that. There's any number of ways a judge can address it. So just some notes on here. It says the judge may issue additional time to come into compliance and or issue fines. A judge has the authority to have an outside source complete what is necessary to become in compliance with code and fine the person for the cost of the work from the outside source, as well as other fines. So say you have this huge accumulation of trash in your yard and it needs to be addressed. You've been given a month to go through and deal with it and you still haven't dealt with it. The judge can go through and say, well, if you're not going to deal with it, I'm going to have waste management come out there, pile everything up and throw it away. Here's your bill. There's also the possibility of seizure through asset forfeiture. Basically, if there's a problem with a house being condemned or property that is outside of code and is being a problem, that property can be seized through the asset forfeiture process. This can be a little concerning, especially for something like a house. A house gets out of compliance, do not occupy gets on it, the person doesn't want to deal with this, so they flee the state. The judge has the option of going through and engaging with civil asset forfeiture on that property. Kind of like with a traffic ticket, when a code violation's been corrected, all fines have been paid, the case is closed. So, how is law enforcement important? It helps protect citizens from more severe civil suits from other citizens, like we talked about with the kids playing in the cars or stepping on the nail, or the various health and safety hazards. It aids in drug investigations. Something that tends to be very common with drug cases and drug houses is they're very messy. So if code enforcement is going through and inspecting, say, weeds around a yard or an accumulation of trash and sees drug paraphernalia, well, they'll come to us and say, I saw this. We can get a warrant to go through and address that drug situation that was observed. It aids in child safety and child neglect. You saw the picture of the unsafe living conditions. Could you imagine a child living in conditions where they have to poop in a bucket, or there's so much animal feces everywhere that when they leave the house, they're covered in just refuse and animal matter? These are the kinds of things that are very helpful. This is where code enforcement helps with law enforcement. It aids in animal safety, cruelty, and neglect investigations. So, when you see a dog on the loose, or someone going through and basically just being rotten to an animal, being the worst of man to an animal, code enforcement addresses that. It reduces public contact it aids in reducing the possibility of public contracting illness or injury. This goes back to the trash. When you have the human feces everywhere, or a huge accumulation of dog feces, the worms, the bacteria, the viruses, they aid in making sure that the community as a whole stays safe from stuff like that. It increases the value of the community. It keeps the community clean. It goes through, and when a community is clean, it helps bolster the land value. It helps make what you've worked for worth more. So if you have a $250,000 house, and right next to it you have a house that's completely caved in, or a drug house, well, obviously your $250,000 house might only be worth $50,000. This helps protect your assets. This helps protect what you work for. So basically, long story short, code enforcement is there to make sure that people stay civilized with each other, people stay clean, and people are just good neighbors to one another. That is the meat and potatoes of code enforcement. So these are the references. If anybody has any questions, like I said, get a hold of me if you want the PowerPoint. But that's just a very short version of what code enforcement deals with.
Okay, so like I said, where you guys kind of come in is I've made code enforcement kind of a priority with the police department. In fact, we just created a tracking sheet. So if you guys have code enforcement complaints, call the city, and we're going to log every one of them. And then, so each day when the code enforcement officer comes on duty, he's just going to pick 5 of those and go out and start hammering away at those. And then I'm a visual person, so I need it color coded. So if it's red, that means he's got some work to do. Once it turns green, that means that code has been that issue has been addressed, and then he's doing follow-up and stuff like that. At the end of the day, with code enforcement, the number one priority is to get compliance. If we don't have to write a single ticket on code enforcement, then we're successful in getting people in compliance, which is what we want. Whether it be weeds, whether it be animals, whether it be just the overall blight, whether it be the trash, things like that. Sometimes it does come to tickets. My first week here, over a trash complaint that was had been going on and on and on, and I finally just said, look, we're going to go down and just cite this guy, and we're going to send him to court so he can take care of the trash. But that's really where you guys come in, the eyes and ears of the community, or anybody. We just want them calling us, and we're going to create this list, and then we're going to go through this list as we build it out, and then the code enforcement officer keeps him really focused on what's important rather than just bouncing around looking for violations, having the eyes and ears of the community say, hey, this place is a problem. There's weeds here, there's trash here, there's blight, there's some of these other pictures that you saw doing that, and then we're hoping that we can really kind of step up code enforcement over the next, until we get it taken care of. It'd be nice to not have any code violations, but we know that's not going to happen. And sometimes, we find a lot with the rental properties and stuff is the owner's out of state or something like that, and they're renting, and the renter's not taking care of it. And we've been very successful getting a hold of the owner, tracking him down, and then they immediately get it taken care of. We've been real successful with like 3 or 4 of those just recently and stuff. So really, again, that's where we want you, just so you kind of have an idea. But we all know those places, right? It came up at council last week of the sidewalks. Somebody's weeds or their trees are growing out into the sidewalk, so people have to walk out into the street. So those are the type of things that we're looking for. Those are easy to address, easy for us to fix, or get them to correct it pretty quick. But again, you guys are really the eyes and ears, so we'll take any questions that you have.
I appreciate what the officer shared with us. I certainly recognize the difficulty of being a law enforcement officer in today's environment, and I'm 100% supportive of our local police, our state police, our national enforcement officers. And so I just want to thank you for being willing to come to our community and invest a part of your life in this small community. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the highest denominator and 10 being the lowest, I want to address a 10 right now. And I hope it doesn't sound petty, but it may. I happen to be one of the few people that live on Highway 160 on the west end of town. Most of the east side is businesses and other concerns. I'm 75 years old, and my patience level may not be as tolerant as it used to be, but yeah, I might be a grouchy old man, I don't know. But there is an issue that I really am bothered by, and I think anybody else that lives on First Avenue, if they're not bothered by it, they got better hearing than I do, or less hearing than I've gotten. I'm almost totally deaf. There is an incessant number of cars that drive up and down First Avenue with their radios on bass, full blast. It goes on incessantly, even at midnight. And I mean, I chose to live on First Avenue, so I'm not defending that I, didn't have a choice. I could have lived somewhere else. But it really is aggravating and almost intolerable at times because it's so persistent. And it seems like whoever these folks are, they might just be teenagers. I was one of those, and I got in trouble when I was that age. But whatever it is, it seems like they don't have a job. That's all they do is drive up and down First Avenue with their radios up full blast. Now, does anybody else know what I'm talking about? Okay. And it's just, it rattles your house. You try to go to sleep at night, and this stuff, you know, you got to have the window open for a little fresh air. Anyway, like I said, it's on a scale of 1 to 10. This is a 10, but it bothers me. And I don't know if there's a noise enforcement. I've seen the sign on the edge of town that says, but I think that refers primarily to brakes and trucks. But this is noisy, and it's really aggravating.
So you live just down from the PD? Do you live just east of the police department then?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I'm having Officer Hill take notes here, and we'll definitely address it. I don't know if we have I believe we do have I'm new to looking at the code, but I believe there is a noise ordinance.
Yes, we do have a noise ordinance.
Yep.
And it does specifically address sounds coming from vehicles. There's a certain level of sound that it has to be over. We have a decibel meter, basically we can measure how much sound it is, or if we're able to locate vehicles like that.
Got it.
I would say visit Love's.
Loves? Yes.
Because, you know, I'm right there next door. And when they stop to get gas, you know, they don't turn off the radio while they're pumping gas.
No, they haven't.
You know, and that, believe it or not, it vibrates my building.
Oh,
You know, so I'm with you on that. I don't know what you can do about it, but.
Maybe it could be a set time that not
Well,
after 10 is better than midnight.
Right. Well, I think noise ordinance applies to any time of the day. So that's something that we'll absolutely look into and step up some enforcement on it and stuff in the evenings and stuff like that.
We live right across from Michael and Linda, and I know what they're talking about, and it. When we first moved here 3 years ago, I think we were amazed at how quiet it was inside of our house, even though we lived on First Avenue. That has gone away. It's just kind of crept in over the past 3 years, and it's not just the stereo. Do y'all hear the engines revving as well? There, and I've narrowed it down to one truck, one of them anyway. I don't have a license number, but I have a truck. But he loves to pull out of Davis and just.
I know who you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about? Okay.
That's when I wake up every morning.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's the type of stuff that we're looking for, and we will absolutely address this. So the Loves thing is an interesting one. That might be just some education with them as a business and say, hey, can you remind your people or even put up a sign that says, you know, noise ordinance enforced here. That's just some of those things are pretty easy to at least try and do some education on. What else you got? Yes, sir.
Just a quickie, I'm curious, what department do bears fall into?
That would be the Division of Wildlife.
Oh, okay, so did that one get found, or?
I don't think they did. I don't think they found it, but yeah. Yeah, we stuffed him pretty quick. The bear issue is solved. There was a report this morning of a bear over near City Hall. So we called we couldn't find it. We had several officers in the area and we could not find the bear. But it's kind of common to see bears in the towns. But it would actually fall under animal control. Put a collar on that one, right? See him rope that one and see how that goes for him. What else? Yes, sir.
What is the code enforcement around both abandoned houses and abandoned or unkept businesses? Because if you drive around town, there's a lot of boarded up houses. There's boarded up businesses that are not kept properly. What can we do about that?
So I know the city has been doing some stuff with some of those properties, I think it's through urban development. Is that right, Gary? Right, knocking them down. And I know, if I believe right, I believe the city manager told me there's like 3 or 4 more that they're slowly working through. I think you guys know that process is not quick of doing that. But the code enforcement part of it, and that's why I created this database. Sergeant Martinez made it for me today. So when people call in, we're logging that, and we're going to send him out to start looking at those, and whether it's contacting the property owner or the renter or whoever and saying, hey, you need to get this fixed, and we'll follow the process from there. But so if you've got those, please call us. We'll get that built into the spreadsheet, and then we'll have him start looking at these. And that's just it. The unfortunate thing is there's so many, right? That's why I kind of want to prioritize with this data sheet. There's none that aren't important, but he can just start. It keeps him really focused to start hammering away at some of those, and we're gonna continue to do that.
So to add on to that, we're trying to make downtown look, and we have a nice downtown, by the way.
Very much so.
Right through Del Norte, we have a nice downtown, but there are certain buildings that are not kept. What can code enforcement do about that?
Same thing. We'll follow up with the owners and make sure that it's within code and regulation, whether it's boarded up, there's weeds growing there. Do you guys any specific in mind, Ken? Okay, yeah, well, we can talk offline about that. But yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely follow up with those and go out, send him out. Again, that's exactly what we're looking for, is you guys to be the eyes and ears saying, hey, this specific one, I don't like this, it's obviously in violation, and we'll send him out to work on them.
I go to city council every time I'm getting checked in, and I brought this up just about every time. The diesel place and the trash. If you've gone by, the trash is now in the back. I don't know if you've noticed it, but I go past that place every day, and it's still there. I was just past again twice today. There it sits, and by the back door, and they're black trash bags. I'm assuming it's trash. And it's been going on for 5-6 months?
So I can tell you, Margot, that is one of them. My first week is the exact one that we cited. His court date's coming up here pretty quick.
Okay, I just keep...
It's on the radar.
I just keep you guys on your toes.
Definitely on the radar, but it is that has been cited. An actual citation has been written on that one.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Just for my own curiosity, what percentage of civil and criminal crimes are drug related? If you can put a percentage on it.
I wouldn't even know where to start to put a percentage on that. I wouldn't even want to take a stab in the dark at that, because I just don't. I just don't know. That's a tough one. About how they're interrelated, you mean? Yeah, that'd be tough to. I also think it'd be pretty tough to connect. I mean, you could, but I mean, it'd just be hard to say. Like this business here has been. Is that drug related? Probably not. But it's hard to say. Yes, sir.
One of the things that Chief Rosecrans, I think, did very well was he kind of brought our police department back into the community and really established a great rapport. People started feeling good about the city and so forth. We got the canine and so forth. And I think everybody that's here tonight and the people I talk to want desperately to keep that going. And so I just want you to know that if you need something, tell us.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you're lacking something, let us know about it. Because when I tell people that come to our church is we can do just about anything except read minds, And as a collective, as a community, we really value our first responders, our police officers, our fire department, and so forth. So if you've got a need, you just need to know what it is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I got to say that was when I was doing my research for the city. I didn't just jump into that. That was absolutely one of the reasons that brought me here, is because of the great community support. I'm just going to put this out there, just not knock on wood. This is one of the few communities that has not had a protest. So that says a lot about the community. But along those lines, I tell you, Officer Hill can tell you that I'm very community oriented and minded on that. I even sent them an email saying, I want to see you guys waving at the citizens as you're driving around, because I've literally had people say, hey, look, we love the police department and stuff, be friendlier. And I like to, I'm in the coffee shop every day. I'm in one of the 2 coffee shops every single day. I'm in there buying coffee, or just more, it's more for me to get in to meet people and stuff like that. And more, but I also like coffee a lot. But I just want us to be approachable. Just because we have a uniform, it doesn't mean anything. We're part of the community, come from the community. That's what police are. So we need to be very much involved in the community and be open, that people feel comfortable approaching us. And that's what we need. So we're gonna continue to work on that. I think for the most part, the community feels pretty like they can approach us and ask us questions and stuff like that. But we also need to be out there doing our part to make sure that the communities feels like they can approach us. But I appreciate that very much. And absolutely, if we need something, we'll bring it to your attention. Appreciate that. Appreciate the support. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to reiterate my support for the local police force. I think they're a valuable asset to our community. I always have. When I was on city council, I did, I believe, 3 ride-alongs with 3 different officers. It's certainly an eye-opening experience in what goes on in our community and how the officers handle themselves. But beyond that, I would like to know what your philosophy for you and your guys enforcing the speed laws in this town. I live on South Broadway. The speed limit from 1st Avenue to south of 6th Avenue is 25 miles an hour. And I don't care if it's the school bus, it's CDOT, it's the hay trucks, private citizens. Most of them exceed that speed limit. If they hit the green light at 2nd Avenue, they're gone. So and I believe the previous police chief indicated to me, well, he said, have you had any accidents? And I said, no. And he said, well, then it's not a problem. And we have other issues other places. And I'm sorry, that did not go over big with me at all.
So interesting you say that. I literally, at about 4:15 this afternoon, met with the captain from State Patrol right down at the South City limits on that very area for that very reason. Because part of that, right at, it's just right there at Lariat, it goes into the county. So I literally met with him this afternoon and discussed that very issue on speeding. Because I had another citizen from down there call and complain about the speeding down there. He lives down there. And he called me this afternoon, and I'm like, well, I'm going to go down and check this out. So just by chance, I heard the captain from State Patrol coming through. I have some connections at State Patrol, so I met with him, and we talked about literally this afternoon about enforcement down there on that south part. Because the complaint that the other citizen had was, as they're going out of town, it goes 45 or 35, 45, and then it hits 65. Well, we've only got a part of that before, but they're already doing 65 by the time they hit that 45. So we will step that up.
Well, I would certainly appreciate it. I've lived in my house for almost 43 years, and I've seen how the traffic patterns have changed. And I understand we're getting more people, and we're seeing, for instance, like more log trucks and hay trucks than we ever used to see. And that adds to it. But I even challenged the former chief to come and sit on my front porch and just watch the traffic.
Well, I can tell you, just because you don't have crashes, that's not an indicator that it's a problem at all. I worked for State Patrol for 25 years and saw what speed can do. So I have a pretty good understanding of your concern, and that's always a big issue. So absolutely. Again, the timing was impeccable because I met with him this afternoon. So we'll step it up down there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about fire burning of trash. in town, is that legal or not?
I am going to have to look at that. I'm going to go on a limb and say probably not. I don't think trash can be burnt in the city limits, but let me check the ordinance on that real quick.
Well, I have a neighbor that works on cars, and he's got an incinerator in the back that's right next to me, and the wind comes like that, and he's taking his car parts and burning them like an incinerator, and I'm getting all the gas fumes. But I did confront him, and he said he wouldn't. I don't know if he's not really good anymore, but he said the fire department gave him permission to do that.
I'll talk with Pat on that too to make sure.
And he was burning, car seats.
Yeah, no.
All that with chemical.
That's I can just tell you I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that's probably not illegal, or that's probably not legal. That doesn't even sound right.
Well, I don't mind if he has a barbecue or fry some hot dogs, but not these car parts that are sticking up out of there.
Yeah, smoke and that's nasty.
So I don't know the full extent of it, but last year, and I guess our city council folks would know, we had some changes to the burning ordinances. What you could burn, what you couldn't burn, what kind of pit it had to be in, et cetera, so forth. And so a lot of things have changed last year on that. Car parts never came up.
Yeah, I can't imagine that being legal. So we'll check into that, and if you see it again, then call us, and we'll definitely head over there.
There is chemical smell.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, all night I thought maybe I might be gassed.
Yeah, make sure you call us when you have that kind of stuff going on.
As far as the actual burning of trash, I don't have an answer to that. But as far as burning anything that does create one of those noxious odors, like I addressed, anything that creates a noxious smoke or odor is not allowed in the city limits. So burning of rubber, out. Burning of styrofoam and plastic, out.
That just makes sense because of the chemicals. So if that happens again, you just call us, and we'll send somebody over. Any other questions? Anything else? Well, I just want to say thank you all for coming. Great questions, great comments. And again, I would ask that you, as you're seeing these violations, call us. Call City Hall, and then we'll either call us directly or everybody has access to this tracking that we're using so that we can log complaints and ordinance violations, code violations.
Who are we supposed to call, 911 or what?
No. 511?
Oh yeah, that just call dispatch. The number here is 852-5111.